Happy Halloween! I'm a bunny, duh. I would also be a felon in 32 states if I didn't refilm this video, because the first time I filmed it, I had an ongoing wardrobe malfunction for the whole video without me noticing, and now I'm wearing a turtleneck so weird men on the internet won't call me a whore. They still might, just because I exist as a woman, and that coincidentally is the perfect, lighthearted, and not at all concerning segue into today's topic. At face value, it would seem that films like 1978's Halloween have no discernible profoundness outside of naked teenagers getting annihilated, underage consumption of beer and parties, and an unknown threat of a masked intruder watching from the shadows. Of course, people don't necessarily watch horror for astute plots or inspiring dialogue, but the truth is, all great art commentates on contemporary social and political phenomenons. For instance, The Hunger Games commentates on the ills of capitalism, consumerism, and the promise of revolution in their wake. Get Out commentates on liberal racism and how the horrors of the film permeate our everyday lives. And now everyone thinks they can write a movie about racism that's just as nuanced and hard-hitting as that one, and we end up with movies like Karen, which only commentates on how far I can be pushed by the media before I snap. This Tyler Perry ass wig. Hell is hot. Despite the understanding of its conservative and lowbrow nature, the horror genre is not below social and political critique. Take John Carpenter's Halloween as example. Despite movies like 1974's Black Christmas and Texas Chainsaw Massacre, along with 1960's Psycho, which are all considered precursors of the slasher film subgenre, Halloween is considered a vanguard in its own right. Slashers are described by Oxford Languages as, quote, a horror movie, especially one in which victims, typically women or teenagers, are slashed with knives and razors. Halloween helped introduce the virginal final girl and her impure friends getting slaughtered trope, as well as the masked killer hunting suburbia with a sick theme song backtracking the visuals. The rise of slasher films in the 1980s saw the likes of Wes Craven's Nightmare on Elm Street and 8 full installments of Friday the 13th, because apparently no one in the 80s had a hobby. And who fucking named these films? Jason Takes Manhattan? Is he Kermit the fucking Frog? These 3 franchises arguably commentate on the contemporary fears and anxieties surrounding youth culture, such as underage drinking and drug use, uninterest in education.
So who cares? I always forget my chemistry book and my math book and my English book and my French book, and well, who needs books anyway? I don't need books.
Legends say this monologue is what got her killed. Bye, Linda. See you in hell. There's also a perceived condemnation of premarital sex. By Annie. Hell is hot. And an emphasis on the invasion of others into the otherwise safe confines of white suburbia and the middle-class family home. Wonder what that's about. The truth is, the best horror is political, it's social, it has something to say beyond the blood, guts, and yitties that permeate the screen. And dare I say, the best horror can even be feminist. I know. The idea that any female protagonist of a horror film, let alone the gory violence of vintage slashers, can be analyzed through a feminist lens seems baffling. After all, the horror genre sees its female characters tortured both psychologically and physically, violated, abused, and eventually murdered, oftentimes longer than their male counterparts. Black women especially don't stand a chance, with it being so common for black characters to die in horror films that the joke has even penetrated Hollywood itself. We gonna die, yo. And if you're queer or queer-coded, well,
Richie.
Good luck, Charlie. Long story short, horror movies do have a misogynistic, racist, and homophobic streak within them, one that is undebatable. Horror as a vehicle to discuss feminist theory and ideals has long since been a topic of discussion in academic circles. Just like it can be used to commentate on the perils of white flight or the absence of parents in a teenager's life, horror can also be utilized to commentate on violence committed against women at the hands of patriarchal systems, and more specifically, violence carried out by singular men.
Not all men, I'm aware.
Don't feel obligated to write a book in my comment sections. I know. Men perpetrating violence against women is a common theme connecting some of the most popular horror and slasher films, like Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, Invisible Man, Scream, Jennifer's Body, and Halloween. Throughout these movies, the threat of male violence and toxic masculinity appears unkillable at times and omnipresent at others. Therefore, horror and the slasher subgenre can be filtered through a feminist lens, critiquing and observing the pervasive violence women face every day. I realize I'm being generous here. Just call me Ellen. Or maybe don't. I admit the premise sounds strange, but as laughable as the standpoint is, it's a lot more nuanced than we actually give it credit for. These sort of topics are more diverse than a black and white dichotomy. As Sir Kenza and Kuklon state, dualisms, either or, you, me, good, bad, high, low, are so deeply embedded in Western knowledge structures that they often seem like natural categories. These dualisms, as Deborah Baker Beck puts it, God, what a tongue twister, create a world, or at least a Western world, where, quote, those who do not fit the good qualifications automatically are cast as bad, end quote. So am I saying horror is a great feminist genre that has never added trauma to the feminine psyche? No, because I don't even know what that means. What I am saying is that horror has potential, like a toxic but hot person who displays nothing but red flags, but red just so happens to be your favorite color. Before we begin, it's only right that we define some key terms that will be used moving forward. I know you hate this section. It's the perfume department all over again. We'll be defining feminism, feminist media, the final girl trope, female agency, as well as intersections to look out for, and reclamation of power. Feminism is a hard term to pin down. It's fraught with emotional, political, and often detested history, with many standout eras and contemporary spins. But according to Linda Steiner, a professor at Philip Merrill College of Journalism and author of Feminist Media Theory, feminism is defined as, quote, an emancipatory, transformational movement aimed at undoing domination and oppression, end quote. Not even this definition, according to Steiner, has the ability to encompass the complexities of the movement, but if this doesn't, damn, what will? Feminist media, then, would employ the same beliefs and theories of feminism itself. This is a very subjective label to use because not every feminist will agree on what is and what is not empowering or liberating for women in the media. The fact that I'm doing this video at all will be faced with some disagreement, so that's my opinion! There's your warning. Explicit forms of feminist media may seek to show women as free agents, emancipated from the oppression of systematic sexism. Fan favorite depictions of feminist characters are usually women who expel sassiness a la Blair Waldorf or masculine-coded brutality like Your Next Aaron. But the definition of feminist media that I find more fitting is one provided by Kelly Gredner, a film critic, self-proclaimed feminist, and horror lover. Gredner states, when a horror film doesn't hesitate to show the fear that women experience on a daily basis, this is feminist horror. From our ever-changing bodies and intricate emotions to how we are in a constant fight for our lives, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, or even literally. Feminist horror shows the nuances of being a woman, end quote. The final girl trope is another one of those pop culture staples that has a lot of dualisms. The final girl in a horror movie is usually virginal, or at least doesn't partake in sexual activity throughout the film, because as we know,
don't have sex, because you will get pregnant and die.
Which has its own sexist undertones, but we'll get into that later. The final girl is the last girl standing and usually finds a way to outsmart or kill her attacker using wits or sheer luck. And lastly, we have female agency and the reclamation of power. They're not used synonymously so much as they simply fit better together in this list. Not every character who has agency has power, as we see with countless tropes within horror classics. Women who own their sexuality, aka women who have sexual agency, are often the first ones to be killed, arguably a trend started by Halloween and shown in subsequent slashers like Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th. Female agency is defined by Brownwyn Davies as, quote, being synonymous with being a person. It is used interchangeably with such concepts as freedom, autonomy, rationality, and moral authority, end quote. Agency isn't a one-size-fit-all concept, just like feminist theory isn't a one-size-fit-all concept. Although white, cis, heterosexual women face misogyny and have their rights routinely regulated or held back by others in power, trans women, queer women, women of color, and those who sit at intersections of those three have less agency under a patriarchal, transphobic, and racist society than cis white women or cis white men. So in intersectional feminist theory, agency is used a bit differently for marginalized or further oppressed people than we would for people who have more options and less obstacles in their freedoms and choices. I'm not saying cis white people don't have any obstacles ever in their lives. I'm just saying cis privilege and white privilege are a hell of a drug. Some of the fears and impediments that trans, queer, and people of color face will never affect white, cis, heterosexual people. Class also plays a role. Now, if we're being honest with each other, a great deal of horror classics don't acknowledge these complexities, but for the hell of it, I just want to emphasize that intersectional feminism and the analysis of female agency must include race, class, sexuality, in addition to gender. In general, when a female character gains agency through a feminist lens, she is no longer perceived as an object or an other. The same can be said for the reclamation of female power. When women reclaim their power within a horror movie, they reclaim the ability to influence the course of events in that movie. They stand up for themselves, they fight back, they turn the terror from themselves and oftentimes onto the offending party. They reclaim what was taken from them through the torture or violence they experienced. All right, you can stop holding your breath. We're done. So in order for horror to be considered a feminist piece of media within these contexts, it must emancipate, transform, and undo domination and oppression, usually in terms of women under the oppressive nature of male violence. You don't need me to tell you that that's ambitious for a genre that gruesomely murders young women for entertainment, and because Black and other women of color are often left out of or tokenized within the horror genre, there's really no way for horror to be truly feminist, aka intersectional. Despite horror not emancipating or undoing domination and oppression, I would argue that by portraying these circumstances, it makes visible the realities of womanhood, which to a point comes across as feminist by giving women a voice. It's a form of media representation which a 1977 U.S. Commission on Civil Rights marked as significant for women and people of color due to its ability to, quote, confer status on certain individuals and groups, telling the viewer who and what is important to know about. Realistic portrayals of womanhood is subjective in this case, but usually portrays the psychological, physical, and emotional relationship women have with themselves and others under a patriarchal system. As Gredner states, it must be a film where women can, quote, scream their loudest into the void and finally be heard, end quote. With that being said, we must start with a woman who is oppressed or dominated. This can be noted by her age, race, gender, place within a high school food chain, or violations carried out against her by others, namely men. She must be tortured and manhandled after finding the bodies of her closest friends. She must be sacrificed by a shitty indie band who can only land gigs in downtown bars to minimal success and come back as a bloodthirsty demon who's in love with her best friend and flies, but actually she's just hovering. It's really not that impressive. God, do you always have to undermine everything I do? You are such a player hater. She must be her. Specifically, she must be Natalie Portman's portrayal of Nina Sayers, a 20-something repressed ballerina performing at a New York dance company. Nina is a character in Black Swan, a 2010 psychological horror movie that follows the emotional and, at times, ambiguous journey of Nina's descent into madness. Nina represents aspects of womanhood under a microscope, one being that in a woman-dominated art, she is sexually harassed and violated by her male artistic director on numerous occasions. The implication is that these sexual advances are what gets Nina and other women within the company career-defining roles. Sexuality and subsequent shaming is not removed from the narrative of successful women in real life, especially in areas dominated by men. There is this expectation in pop culture that women who are on top fucked their way there, as Lana Del Rey once put it. And Black Swan has his finger right on the pulse. Nina is not the first woman Thomas, her director, takes advantage of. Beth, somehow played by Winona Ryder despite me not noticing until I watched the credits, is also a victim of Thomas' predatory nature. She's also the victim of ageist ideals that push her out of ballet at the young age of 31, replaced quickly thereafter with the younger, more desirable Nina. We see that Nina is affronted by Thomas' advances in the beginning, but begins to form a sort of Stockholm syndrome around the relationship, as noted by the Feminist Spectator. Nina, quote, idealizes and even identifies with Thomas and his mercurial cruelty, end quote. This identification and idealization of Thomas could arguably stem from Nina's upbringing and overbearing mother, as we see on numerous occasions that her mother is just as fickle and critical. It could also be a common reaction to abuse. She believes it's her fault that these things are happening to her instead of placing the blame on Thomas. But I would also argue that it has something to do with Nina's desperate strive for perfection. This is a significant theme within the movie. Nina wants to be perfect. Perfect like Beth, the discarded ballerina that came before her. Perfect like Lily, the sensual and seductive specter that represents everything Nina is not. This attempt to reach perfection is noted by Nina's inability to relax. She's constantly working herself past her limit, constantly trying to obtain a specific body, constantly trying and trying and trying. Even her sexuality must be perfect, sculpted especially for the male gaze. As Bliss White Cries writes, the whole history of this film revolves around Nina's struggle to learn to become both a virgin and a whore, albeit in a metaphorical way. She must embody innocence as depicted by her shy demeanor and infantilized bedroom, but she must also be seductive, sensual, and sexy, as depicted by Thomas' exploitation of her. This is a common theme not only in horror, but in reality. Male audiences are excited to see full frontal nudity in horror, but also whoop and jeer as those same women are slaughtered for their perceived transgressions. This isn't anything different to men desiring or seeking out explicit content from women while also condemning them for having an OnlyFans or participating in other forms of sex work. You can be sensual, but not on your own terms, unless you have Michael Myers appear in your doorway with a sheet and sunglasses, looking particularly goofy and unthreatening, until he kills Linda, I guess. Nina's inability to be perfect outside of her own ideal of womanhood sets her at odds with the other women in the film. She's outcast by the other dancers for her perceived weirdness. She's put against Lily, who allegedly tries to steal her role from her. Her relationship with Beth is skewed and destroyed because although Nina claims to idolize her, they are clearly jealous of one another. The entire catty thing seems like it's written by a man, or more so three, because of course womanhood can be nothing more than competition between each other for the attention and love of a man or audience. And yet those aforementioned aspects are not unlike the reinforcement of perfection tied to womanhood in real life. Women must fit a certain beauty standard. They must not age. They must be receptive to sexual advances at the stake of their livelihoods. They must be sensual but untouched. They must be picked by a man or a job or the general public. They must be the perfect girl for men, as Bliss White Cries states. In many ways, Black Swan is what Kelly Gretner considers feminist horror. It shows the fears, the ever-changing nature of womanhood, and bodily perfection. It shows intricate emotions and women's constant need to fight for our lives, financially, sexually, and at times physically. Nina does scream her loudest, and arguably she is finally heard by the end of the movie. In a way, she even reclaims the power that has been stripped from her under the patriarchal system. Yet, it comes at a price. There are many ways to read the ending of Black Swan. You can argue that Nina is emancipated from the oppressive, or rather repressed, nature of her life, and is given agency that for so long evaded her. You can interpret it as Nina killing off a part of herself, or view it as her entrance into womanhood, liberated from the confines of everyone's attempt to infantilize her. In that case, the blood seeping through her ballet costume would represent menstrual blood. You can also interpret the end of the film as the end of Nina's life. I mean, she's fucking bleeding out and the movie fades to white. Baby girl shut down. To watch the main character struggle the entire movie, be sexually preyed upon and at times berated by her boss, only to watch her own self-inflicted wounds cause her death, feels anything but empowering. That makes me wonder, are the covert feminist themes within the movie nullified if Nina dies? Is living any better? Sorry, I can literally hear my therapist scribbling notes as we speak. What I mean is, do women have to survive in horror movies for the feminist themes within, that is, if there are any in the first place, to be impactful? The horror genre champions power. Power exercised by men against women, either sexually or physically, and power reclaimed by women who fight against or even kill their male attacker. These themes are found in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, as noted by Leatherface placing his inoperative chainsaw against the thigh of Stretch as he convulses in happy delight. It's found in You're Next, as a group of masked assailants pick off a rich, estranged family one by one at their reunion, but fail to kill Aaron, who is actively in the process of killing them back. This excision of power is significant to the genre, not only because it's demanded by the audience, but because horror, quote, not despite but exactly because of its crudity, gives us a clearer picture of current sexual attitudes, end quote. These attitudes form around violence perpetrated against women by men, yes, but more specifically, this violence is perpetrated usually against women who know their attacker, as reflective of real life. Laurie Strode, the final girl from Halloween, is stalked and attacked numerous times by Michael Myers, who turns out to be her older brother. Ready or Not, a 2019 horror thriller by Matt Bettinelli, Open, and Tyler Gillette, follows a young bride as she fights for her life against her in-laws. Despite thinking her new husband will protect her, he actually tries to kill her at the end of the movie, when she implies that she will divorce him. The same theme is present in Invisible Man and Scream. These movies showcase a bigger picture, the fact that an overwhelming majority of women are attacked, assaulted, or killed by someone they know, usually an intimate partner or family member. Research conducted by UN Women show that, quote, more than 640 million women globally, aged 15 and older, have been subjected to intimate partner violence. Of the 87,000 women who were intentionally killed in 2017 globally, more than half, 50,000, were killed by intimate partners or family members. More than one-third, 30,000, of the women intentionally killed in 2017 were killed by their current or former intimate partner, end quote. Thus, the patterns of domestic abuse and violence in real life are clearly reflected in the horror genre. The most jarring example, in my opinion, being The Shining. The Shining is a 1980 film directed by Stanley "Fuck You" Kubrick, starring Jack Nicholson as Jack Torrance and Shelley Duvall as Wendy Torrance. The plot is slow-moving at first as we, the audience, and the characters themselves acclimate to their new setting, which is a secluded hotel in snowy Colorado. The film is a mind fuck fest full of ghosts, naked decaying ladies, and visions held by both Danny, the couple's son, and Jack himself, who dreams about killing his family. The Shining's commentary on ongoing abuse is subtle, depicted best by passing lines and backstories, which aid in concocting a thread of male violence within the story's universe. Before they come to the Overlook, it's revealed by Wendy that Jack previously dislocated Danny's shoulder in a drunken rage. As they first move into the Overlook, they're told that a previous caretaker, Charles Grady, killed his wife and children when he was the caretaker before Jack. And as we come barreling towards the climax of the movie, unexplainable bruises and torn clothes on Danny are attributed to Jack's abuse. This thread of familial violence culminates when Jack begins seeing visions of the overlooked ghosts, including Delbert Grady, a butler who tells Jack that he must correct his wife and child. This quest for correction leads to the most memorable scene in film history, Jack taking an axe to the bathroom door Wendy is hiding behind. This scene is what Carol J. Clover would call the penetration scene, an intentionally gendered term to represent male violence in horror. The penetration scene is a scene in which, quote, the victim locks herself in a house, room, closet, car, and waits with pounding heart as the killer slashes, hacks, or drills his way in. The penetration scene is commonly the film's pivotal moment. If the victim has up to now simply fled, she has at this point no choice but to fight back. End quote. The discomfort of The Shining is pervasive. As an audience, we're watching a domestic abuser torture and attempt to kill his wife and child, as well as seeing the effects this has on both Danny and Wendy. Yet we're unable to do anything about it. As a 2019 Vulture magazine review states, looking into Duvall's huge eyes from the front row of the theater, I found myself riveted by a very poignant form of fear. Not the fear of an actor out of her element, or the more mundane fear of a victim being chased around by an axe-wielding maniac. Rather, it was something far more disquieting and familiar. The fear of a wife who has experienced her husband at his worst and is terrified that she'll experience it again. End quote. The discomfort with the film doesn't alleviate once we separate art from reality, because then we'll still be faced with the alleged isolation, devaluation, and mocking Shelley Duvall, who played Wendy, faced on the set at the hands of Stanley Kubrick, the director. According to Far Out magazine, Kubrick commanded the crowd not to show any sympathy for Duvall and asked them to ignore her completely. He never complimented her scenes while constantly praising Nicholson, who was seated right next to her. This intensive training of the mind with isolation and torture for the role was too stressful for Duvall, who started losing hair and was, quote, in and out of health, end quote, having been pushed to the very threshold. One of the most poignant areas of discomfort in the film, both for the fear of an abused wife permeating the scene, as well as the alleged mistreatment from Kubrick, is the staircase scene. As Wendy swings a baseball bat back and forth at her violent husband, the exhaustion is palpable. While it works for the atmosphere, the reality is Stanley Kubrick forced both Duvall and Jack to redo the scene 127 times, which left Duvall, who had to scream and cry on command over and over again, with, quote, a hoarse throat, raw wounded hands, and severe dehydration. End quote. In the end, Wendy survives alongside Danny, with Jack having died in the snowy maze outside the Overlook. Oh, shiver me timbers ass. In this final girl narrative, as well as the story of Shelley Duvall, we see the reality of womanhood, the constant belittling, devaluation, mocking, and violence perpetrated by domestic partners or friends or employers. Realities that are often invisible but made opposite through the camera. Ordinarily, to be peered upon by an ever-present eye feels uncomfortable and debasing, but as Jessica Perrant states, feminist horror doesn't stray from the daunting truth but forces its viewers to witness it head on. End quote. And speaking of forcing people to watch things, Sofia Takal's Black Christmas, released in 2019, is a loose remake of 1974's film of the same name. It's a horror film written and directed by women, for women, and exclusively about women. It is the first movie I mentioned in this script that was made on purpose, which is already a red flag, but it's also the only movie that was made to be as, quote, feminist as possible. In that way, you would think the movie would be commendable or even just watchable. Critics gave Takal's Black Christmas a whopping 39% on the tomato meter, with many stating it left much to be desired with its, quote, pandering feminist anthems, and that the, quote, feminist plot prevents the plot related to the slasher from flowing. In other words, people hated it because they felt it was too feminist for horror, which is bullshit. I call bullshit. I don't think the film is too feminist per se, because that would cause me to ask, what does too feminist mean? Do you hate women? I'm kidding. My problem with the movie is that I think it's too much of a certain kind of feminism. A feminism that reeks of slogan on a Target t-shirt, corporate white girl boss, hashtag pink hat feminism that the overt themes within the film unfortunately perpetuates, to the point that it often comes across as cynicism instead of authenticity. In other words, it felt like Tikal was satirizing the feminist movement, and it wasn't even clever enough to be funny. The movie positions toxic masculinity as a cult, which, if you forego semantics, it can be argued to be so. But the literal manifestation of it feels like a joke. When Lindsay, the first girl to die in the film, is being attacked, she flaps her arms in the snow, creating a haphazard snow angel. When her body is dragged away, the vertical shape adds to the spherical visual of her snow angel, creating a phallic symbol. There's nothing wrong with dicks. They're fine and all, I guess. But these sort of conspicuous nods are placed throughout the movie, and quite frankly, I was starting to get annoyed. If not satire, the film was jumping to immense conclusions that the audience wouldn't understand what it was trying to critique. But we all got it within the first 5 minutes. But despite the execution, I think the overall message is visceral. It does highlight the fears and journey of womanhood. There's this shot of Lindsay walking with her keys between her fingers because she thinks she's being followed by a man at night. And this is transformed towards the end of the movie when one of the main girls, I forgot her name, I'm sorry. She takes the keys between her fingers and kills her attacker. There's also the mocking, disbelief, and tarnished reputation women face after outing her assaulter, and colleges or other places of power protecting the men who commit assault rather than the woman who was assaulted. The reason I have a problem with the argument that the 2019 version is too feminist in comparison to the original is that it's just false. Fake news. The 1974 version of the film follows a similar group of sorority girls, Jess, Barb, and Phil, as they reel from the disappearance of their friend Claire, as well as cope with obscene and threatening phone calls coming from an unknown man. But what sets this version apart from the remake is that, for one, it's written much better. 2, the characters are all distinct and realistic instead of caricatures. And 3, the storyline is distinctly political without coming across as mocking. Jess, who serves as the final girl in the film, reveals to her boyfriend Peter that she's pregnant with no intention of keeping the baby. This sets up the remainder of the film as Peter's anger and fear of A-wording their baby drives a wedge between him and Jess. By the end of the film, it's assumed that Peter is the one who committed all of the violent acts and placed the phone calls to the girls, most likely as a response to Jess's refusal to commit to him. Despite being in the business of documenting the slaughter of young women for the sake of spine-chilling entertainment, Black Christmas is not as distant from feminist or empowering messages as one may assume. Jess is a self-willed, ambitious, and blunt woman who stands strong in her decisions. Her employment of agency is best described through the A-word storyline, as Peter makes the decision for her to keep the baby despite her persistent rejections. Frustrated by her strong will, Peter tells her that he'll quit his music conservatory program in order to marry her, which Jess again rejects, stating, "Remember when we first met, and I told you about some of the things that I wanted to do? I still want to do those things. You can't ask me to drop everything I've been working for and give up all of my ambitions because your plan has changed." End quote. The camera zooms in on Jess at this moment, one of the only moments the feature is utilized, urging the audiences to find significance in what she's saying. Jess is expressing her right to agency, the right to make her own decisions about her own body. The fact that the movie was released 1 year after Roe vs. Wade adds immense weight to this plotline. In the end, we never really find out who the killer actually is. We barely even see his face. Throughout the film, he remains disembodied. We see the house through his eyes as he stalks the occupants. We hear his ragged breathing and ghostly singing from the attic. We see direct shots of his eyes at moments, primarily when they are wide open and usually right after or before he's killed one of the girls. But we never really see him, as if he's a representation, not a person. The vagueness of his character is intentional, as the filmmakers believed it made him all the more horrifying for audiences. And as the Wikipedia page on his character states, Quote, critics and art historians have noted that by leaving the character enigmatic, it allowed the audience to place their own fears onto the character, forming their own ideas about him and his motivations. End quote. I would argue then that the disembodied killer in Black Christmas represents male violence against women. It isn't unlike the 2019 adaptation where toxic masculinity and violence takes a literal form of a cult, but I would argue that this manifestation, the unknown, all-seeing specter haunting women in the safety of their own homes, is much more impactful. As Jordan Searle states, in a way, the unseen killer in Black Christmas and Peter, the male villain we do see, are a biting critique of the more toxic forms of masculinity. The killer alternates between childish tantrums and extreme brutality, as if just being in the presence of women throws him into a mental frenzy. Once he kills Claire, he puts her in a rocking chair, and later we see he's placed a baby doll in her lap. He hides from women until he kills them, and upon their death, enjoys having full control of their bodies. Within the eternal logic of Black Christmas, the desire to control women is readily seen as villainous. End quote. Both the original Black Christmas as well as his 2019 remake show the horrific nuances of being a woman, especially under the oppressive and often violent system of patriarchy. One just happens to be a little more on the nose than the other, but both hold promising messages regardless. The same can be said for most, if not all, slasher and horror films. Whether they're written to be explicitly feminist or unintentionally hold the ideals of female agency, power reclamation, and the right to survive, horror has a great possibility to show just how merciless toxic masculinity can be and just how resilient women are. Whether you believe the final girl trope or possible commentary on female existence and sexuality holds any feminist value in the horror sphere, or if you just think this video was fucking stupid. Thanks for watching anyways. Happy Halloween. Don't forget to form a circle of salt to protect yourself from zombies, witches, and old boyfriends. Though the last one might be on brand, there's nothing scarier than going back to an ex.